The day Sterling Dynamics began to collapse started with something so small, so ordinary, that no one inside the building even noticed. Amara Johnson, billionaire founder of Novagen Technologies, one of the fastest-growing biotech firms in the country, walked into the lobby with the quiet elegance of someone who had nothing to prove. No security entourage, no flashy jewelry, just a long black wool coat, a simple leather bag, and a sharp, focused gaze. She didn't need to announce herself. She was the announcement. But Claire Benson, perched behind the marble reception desk, barely lifted her head from her phone. One glance at Amara's deep brown skin, her understated style, and Claire had already made her decision. "Deliveries are through the service entrance," Claire said sharply, without even asking her name. Her voice was flat, almost bored, like Amara wasn't even worth a second thought. For a moment, Amara stood there, framed by the giant glass doors, the morning sun casting a soft halo behind her. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. Across the lobby, Mark Caldwell, the executive vice president of Sterling Dynamics, stepped out of an elevator. He saw her, immediately recognized her instantly. But instead of rushing to fix the mistake, he stopped, folded his arms across his chest, and watched. Claire, sensing hesitation, raised her voice slightly, drawing attention from nearby staff and visitors. "You need to leave, ma'am. Deliveries go around back. This entrance is for clients and executives only." Amara smiled. A small, polite, almost imperceptible smile. The kind you only learn to perfect after a lifetime of being judged before you even speak. "I have a meeting scheduled at 9 a.m. with Mr. Langston," she said calmly, her voice smooth but firm. Claire's fingers danced lazily over the keyboard, pretending to check the system. Then, after barely glancing at the screen, she said flatly, "There's no appointment under that name. Maybe you're lost." A few people near the lobby's coffee stand had turned now, pretending to sip their drinks while they watched. Across the lobby, Mark Caldwell, the executive vice president of Sterling Dynamics, stepped out of an elevator. He saw her, immediately recognized her instantly. But instead of rushing to fix the mistake, he stopped, folded his arms across his chest, and watched. Claire, sensing hesitation, raised her voice slightly, drawing attention from nearby staff and visitors. "You need to leave, ma'am. Deliveries go around back. This entrance is for clients and executives only." Amara smiled. A small, polite, almost imperceptible smile. The kind you only learn to perfect after a lifetime of being judged before you even speak. "I have a meeting scheduled at 9 a.m. with Mr. Langston," she said calmly, her voice smooth but firm. Claire's fingers danced lazily over the keyboard, pretending to check the system. Then, after barely glancing at the screen, she said flatly, "There's no appointment under that name. Maybe you're lost." A few people near the lobby's coffee stand had turned now, pretending to sip their drinks while they watched. Amara took a slow breath. "Could you double-check, please? It's important." But Claire was already shaking her head. "You need to leave now." And before Amara could even respond, Claire reached over the desk and grabbed the sleeve of her coat. It was a small, sharp movement, a flash of entitlement, like brushing off something she thought didn't belong. Security moved quickly. 2 guards, built like linebackers, flanked Amara in seconds. "You're going to have to come with us, ma'am," one said, trying and failing to sound apologetic. Mark Caldwell stood just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. He made no move to intervene. As the guards escorted her toward the doors, Amara kept her head high. No anger, no protest. Just a cool, detached calm, the kind that rattles people more than any scream ever could. Outside, the crisp morning air stung her cheeks. The city moved around her, busy, oblivious. Amara pulled out her phone. She dialed a single number. 1 ring. Then, in a voice as smooth as glass-cutting steel, she said, "Shut it down. Pull everything." Inside Sterling Dynamics, Claire Benson returned to her phone with a self-satisfied smirk blissfully unaware. That in less than 24 hours, everything around her would start to crumble. And by the time they realized what had happened, it would already be too late. Amara Johnson was not a delivery worker. She wasn't lost. And she most definitely wasn't someone Sterling Dynamics could afford to insult. She was the founder and CEO of Novogen Technologies, a biotech empire she had built from scratch, fueled by nothing but grit, brilliance, and a fire that came from being underestimated her entire life. By 35, Amara had already been on the cover of Forbes twice. She had revolutionized cancer treatment therapies. She had stood on world stages, speaking to presidents and billionaires. And now, she had been minutes away from finalizing a historic merger with Sterling Dynamics, a deal that could have launched them into the future. Could have, because the truth was, Amara hadn't come to Sterling that morning for the contract signing. She had come for one reason only: to test them. Amara believed in partnerships. Yes. But more than that, she believed in character. In how people acted when they thought no one important was watching. It was a trick she had learned early in her career, showing up without warning, dressed like any other guest, no entourage, no flashing credentials. If the company treated her with dignity, even without knowing who she was, they earned her trust. But if they didn't, well, Sterling Dynamics had just failed the test spectacularly. And the cost would be devastating. Upstairs, Robert Langston, Sterling's CEO, was pacing back and forth in a conference room, glancing at his watch every 30 seconds. "She's late," he muttered under his breath. His executives nodded awkwardly, none daring to suggest that maybe, just maybe, something had gone very, very wrong downstairs. Meanwhile, Mark Caldwell lingered in the corner, arms folded, a ghost of a smirk playing at the edges of his mouth. He said nothing, because Mark knew. He had seen Amara's face as security pushed her out the door. And he knew exactly what Sterling Dynamics had just lost. Back at the front desk, Claire Benson was still laughing with her coworker, tapping away on her phone as if nothing had happened. "Did you see her face?" she snickered. "Thought she owned the place or something." Her colleague, a junior assistant named Dylan, forced a weak laugh, but his eyes flickered nervously toward the lobby doors. Something about the woman they had kicked out didn't sit right with him. The way she had carried herself, the chilling calm in her eyes. But Claire didn't notice. Claire didn't notice anything outside her own bubble. Upstairs, Mark Caldwell leaned casually against the conference room window, surveying the city skyline while Robert Langston drummed his fingers on the table. "We should call her assistant," one executive suggested, his voice tight with panic. "Maybe confirm she's on her way." Robert nodded quickly, pulling out his phone. He dialed the direct number they had been given for Amara's team. It barely rang once. "This number has been disconnected," an automated voice chirped. The room froze. "Try her office," Robert barked. The second call went to voicemail. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. Across the room, Mark hid a small, satisfied smile. This was unfolding even faster than he had hoped. He had never wanted the merger. He had warned Robert subtly, carefully, that Novogen Technologies was a risky partner. Too much innovation. Too much change. Too much threat to his comfortable position at the top. And now Mark didn't have to do a thing. Sterling Dynamics had sabotaged itself. All he had to do was sit back and watch it burn. It started quietly. At first, no one inside Sterling Dynamics even noticed. But less than an hour after Amara Johnson stepped out of their lobby, their internal systems started glitching. The IT department's phones rang nonstop. Executives locked out of their emails, conference call lines going dead, encrypted files suddenly missing. By noon, the real damage hit. A breaking news alert flashed across every major business network. Novogen Technologies withdraws from historic merger with Sterling Dynamics citing grave ethical concerns. The headlines spread like wildfire. Within minutes, Sterling's stock price, once a symbol of its unstoppable growth, began to nosedive. Robert Langston burst out of the conference room, face flushed, tie yanked loose around his neck. He stormed into the lobby, barking orders into his phone. Find her. Get her on the phone. Tell her this is a misunderstanding. But there was no one left to call. Amara had cut them off completely, professionally, legally, and very, very publicly. And the worst part? She didn't have to say a word. She didn't have to accuse them of discrimination. She didn't have to explain what Claire had done. All she had to do was walk away. The world, watching closely as always, filled in the blanks themselves. The internet was already tearing Sterling apart. Hashtags like #boycott_Sterling and #respect Black excellence were trending by the hour. Old employees began anonymously leaking horror stories of racism, elitism, and corruption within the company. Investors panicked. Partners fled. And through it all, Claire Benson sat frozen behind her desk, watching the company she thought she represented so proudly unravel at the seams. No one told her anything. No one even looked at her. Because somewhere, deep down, Claire was starting to realize this was her fault. By early afternoon, Sterling Dynamics was in full meltdown mode. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Lawyers flooded the building. Phones rang endlessly with demands for answers from investors, from journalists, from government watchdogs. Inside the executive conference room, the tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. Robert Langston slammed his fist on the table. "Who the hell let this happen?" he roared, his voice hoarse from shouting. A heavy silence fell over the room. No one dared move, except for Mark Caldwell. He leaned back casually in his chair, hands folded neatly in his lap, wearing the calm smirk of a man who had been preparing for this exact moment. "Maybe," Mark said coolly, "you should be asking how a receptionist was allowed to decide who was important and who wasn't." The implication hung in the air. Robert turned furious. "Are you blaming this on Claire? She's a receptionist, Mark. This," he waved wildly at the crashing stock reports on the screen, "this is a collapse of everything we've built." Mark shrugged, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Sometimes the smallest cracks reveal the deepest flaws. It wasn't just about Claire anymore. It was about the culture Robert had allowed to fester under his leadership. The arrogance, the complacency, the quiet biases that no one wanted to talk about until it was too late. And now Sterling Dynamics was bleeding out in public view, and there was no one left to blame but themselves. Still, Mark wasn't finished. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping low enough that only Robert could hear. "You might want to start preparing a statement of resignation before the board asks for it." Robert's face drained of color. For the first time all day, the full weight of what was happening, what was coming, seemed to hit him. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, employees gathered in small, whispering clusters. Some had already started packing up their desks. Others just stared at their phones, watching the chaos unfold on news feeds faster than the company could even react. The empire Robert Langston had spent 20 years building was crumbling. And Mark Caldwell? He was already positioning himself to climb over the wreckage. Downstairs, Claire Benson sat stiffly at the reception desk, her fingers twitching against the keyboard she no longer had the courage to touch. She could feel the stares, the side glances from employees she used to gossip with, the awkward silence that wrapped around her like a noose tightening by the minute. And then she saw him, Robert Langston, storming toward her with a face like thunder. Behind him trailed 2 security guards and a senior HR manager, clipboard clutched tight to her chest. Claire stood up instinctively, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Mr. Langston, I don't understand. Robert didn't even let her finish. "Save it." His voice was ice. He slammed a letter onto the desk. "You're terminated immediately for gross misconduct and breach of company values. Pack your things. You have 10 minutes. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. Terminated? But I didn't even know who she was. The HR manager stepped forward, her voice painfully formal. That's exactly the problem, Claire. You didn't care to know. And now the entire company is paying the price. The words hit harder than any shouting ever could. Claire looked around the lobby, searching for someone, anyone to defend her. But the same coworkers who once laughed at her jokes now avoided her gaze, pretending they didn't even know her. Security hovered closer, politely but firmly waiting for her to move. Heart pounding, Claire realized. She wasn't Sterling Dynamics' proud gatekeeper anymore. She was a scapegoat, disposable, forgotten. And as she packed her things into a cardboard box, head down, shame burning across her cheeks, she thought back to the way she had waved Amara Johnson away that morning. Deliveries go around the back, she had sneered. Now it was Claire who was being shown the door, discarded as easily as the woman she had humiliated. But the cruel twist? Amara hadn't needed to say a single word to destroy her. Claire had destroyed herself. Across the city, high above the skyline in a sleek glass tower, Amara Johnson stood by her office window, silently watching the chaos she had unleashed. Her assistant, Jordan, entered the room, tablet in hand. "It's happening," he said, unable to hide the note of awe in his voice. "Sterling's board is meeting tonight. Emergency session. Robert Langston's expected to resign before morning." Amara didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, as if everything was unfolding exactly as it should. Because the truth was, it was. This wasn't about bruised pride. This wasn't some petty revenge. For Amara, this was a message. A warning to every boardroom, every executive suite, every smug gatekeeper who still believed power came with a particular skin color or pedigree attached. "Disrespect doesn't just cost you deals," she said softly, almost to herself. "It costs you everything." Jordan hesitated, then asked carefully, "Was it worth it? Burning them down like this?" Amara turned from the window, her expression calm but steely. "They lit the match the moment they judged me at the door. I just made sure the fire spread." On her desk, news alerts continued flashing. Sterling Dynamics' collapse wasn't just making headlines, it was starting conversations in industries across the country. Corporate diversity initiatives, bias training mandates, top CEOs facing sudden pressure to review how their companies treated visitors, partners, and people they once thought didn't belong. Amara hadn't just destroyed a company. She had shifted an entire conversation. And she wasn't finished yet. Across the room, a portfolio of new partnership proposals sat waiting. Companies desperate to work with Novagen, not just for Amara's innovations, but for what her name now symbolized: power, integrity, a future where no one would be sent around the back door again. Amara moved toward her desk, slipping on her tailored blazer, the final piece of armor before her next meeting. As she straightened the cufflinks at her wrists, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile this time. "Let's get to work," she said. And the world outside, already shaken, had no idea how much more was coming. That night, under the cold fluorescent lights of the Sterling Dynamics boardroom, Robert Langston faced the final blow. The entire board sat in a tight semicircle, their expressions grim, unreadable. In front of them, Robert, the man who once commanded every room he entered now, looked small, almost fragile. Elizabeth Carr, the chairwoman, didn't waste time. "Mr. Langston," she said crisply, tapping her pen against the table, "due to your failure in leadership, your inability to uphold Sterling's core values, and the catastrophic financial losses incurred today, the board has no choice but to request your immediate resignation." Robert opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing left to say. Every headline, every angry investor call, every falling stock ticker had already said it for him. Sterling was bleeding out, and it was happening on his watch. He stared at the resignation letter placed in front of him. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the pen. "You think this will fix it?" Robert muttered under his breath, the bitterness cutting through. "Throw me to the wolves and pretend the company's soul wasn't already rotten?" Elizabeth didn't flinch. "No," she said simply, "but it's a start." Across the room, in the corner shadows, Mark Caldwell watched it all unfold, silent, patient, and calculating. This was exactly where he wanted Robert. Humiliated, powerless, out of the way. And soon enough, Mark would be the one sitting at the head of that very table. As Robert scribbled his name on the resignation letter, the symbolic end of his reign, Mark allowed himself the faintest smirk. Not because he cared about Sterling's future, but because, in this brutal game of ambition, betrayal, and broken reputations, he had just played everyone perfectly. Or so he thought. For a few brief days, Mark Caldwell thought he had won. He moved into Robert's old office, the one with the panoramic skyline view and the heavy oak desk, and sat there like a king surveying his new kingdom. The media headlines even seemed to favor him at first. Sterling Dynamics appoints new leadership amid crisis. Insiders hope for a fresh start under Caldwell's direction. Mark soaked in the attention, shook hands, gave hollow speeches about rebuilding trust, told investors what they wanted to hear. But beneath the surface, the foundation was already cracking. Because while Mark had been busy scheming to unseat Robert, he hadn't realized just how deep Amara Johnson's reach had spread. New lawsuits flooded in not just from Amara's legal team, but from former employees, civil rights groups, even federal investigators. Each one peeling back another rotten layer inside Sterling Dynamics: discriminatory hiring practices, pay gaps, ignored harassment complaints, and toxic leadership at every level. And guess who had been part of that leadership for years? Mark Caldwell. His name was everywhere in the leaked documents. His emails were subpoenaed. His old recorded meetings, once thought to be private, now surfaced online, filled with casual, damning remarks he never dreamed would go public. Mark had thought removing Robert would cleanse him of guilt. But now the spotlight was swinging onto him, and there was nowhere left to hide. Reporters camped outside Sterling's headquarters. Investors began quietly pulling their money, and employees once cowed into silence started speaking up, naming names. Naming his name. Mark Caldwell wasn't going to be the hero of the Sterling collapse. He was about to become the face of everything wrong with it. And this time, there would be no one left for him to shove into the fire. It didn't take long after that. Within weeks, Sterling Dynamics, the once towering giant of the tech world, was reduced to rubble. The stock price free fell into oblivion. Partnerships dissolved overnight. Federal investigations deepened, dragging senior executives into messy, very public scandals. And at the center of it all, Mark Caldwell, the man who thought he could outsmart everyone, was forced to resign in disgrace, facing lawsuits, criminal charges, and complete social exile. News outlets plastered his face across every channel. Sterling's collapse, greed, racism, and corruption unveiled. It was the end of an empire. But across the city, inside a much different glass tower, another story was unfolding. Amara Johnson stood on the rooftop of NovaGen's new headquarters, a building alive with energy, hope, and ambition. A place where talent was measured by merit, not by skin color or background. Jordan joined her, handing over the final report. "Sterling's bankruptcy is official," he said with a satisfied nod. "Mark Caldwell's assets are frozen. Robert Langston's off the grid. They're both finished." Amara stared out at the horizon, the city bathed in golden light. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. Instead, she felt something deeper, something heavier. Because this was never about personal revenge. This was about making sure the next woman, the next girl with dark skin, a dream in her heart and fire in her spirit, wouldn't be told to go around the back. This was about shifting the culture, about breaking the cycle. "They built their empire on exclusion," Amara said quietly. "We'll build ours on opportunity." Down below, NovaGen employees, a kaleidoscope of backgrounds, talents, and dreams, moved through the lobby, laughing, collaborating, thriving. The future was already here, and it didn't look anything like the past. Amara smiled, the soft wind lifting her hair. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. And somewhere, far from the shining towers and headlines, the ghosts of Sterling Dynamics faded into silence, a relic of a world that refused to change and paid the ultimate price for it.